because I do not deserve your forgiveness. And every single day, I wish I could bring her back.
Forget the male serial killers you usually hear about. The deadliest drama of 2005 unfolded not in a dark alley, but on a digital stage, MySpace. That platform was the real deal back then, where your top 8 was the ultimate social contract. No cap. Enter Adrienne Reynolds, the new girl who was fresh off the bus from Texas to East Moline, Illinois. She was funny, confident, and had that vibe everyone wanted to be around. She quickly fell in with Sarah Cobb and Corey Gregory. Sarah was the queen bee, a dominant figure who everyone was secretly freaking out over. She controlled the whole scene. Corey was her sidekick, a quiet boy completely devoted to her every glance. When Adrienne joined them, the trio looked lit in photos. But beneath the smiles, things got sketchy. Adrienne's confidence was a direct threat to Sarah's crown. Sarah started feeling messed up because Adrienne was getting attention, and the jealousy quickly turned to a cold obsession. Corey was caught in the middle, a rope being pulled. The foundation of their supposed friendship was already cracking, set up for a disaster that would turn an ordinary Friday into a national headline. This was about to go down. Friday, January 21st, 2005. They decided to skip class, a typical teenage move. They hit up Taco Bell for lunch, taking photos like everything was straight up normal. Afterward, Sarah suggested a drive. They piled into the car and headed on the road, driving toward the isolated Black Hawk State Historic Site. Adrienne was chilling in the back seat, oblivious that her friends were driving her to her dead end. When they stopped, the argument blew up. Sarah, completely off the rails with jealousy, accused Adrienne of trying to flex on her, flirting with Corey, and trying to replace her as the leader. Adrienne tried to keep it chill, but Sarah wasn't having it. She lunged first. The fight was quick and brutal. Corey, the loyal follower, backed Sarah up instantly. Together, they strangled Adrienne. As she lay lifeless, Sarah didn't cry. Instead, she coolly lit a cigarette, staring at the body. In that horrifying moment, the girl who was always doing the most to be popular transformed into a cold-blooded killer. There was no plan now, just shared, stunned silence and a body they had to figure out what to. The sheer audacity of what happened next is what makes this case so wild. Instead of calling the cops or freaking out like normal kids, Sarah and Corey drove back to Corey's grandparents' garage and hid Adrienne's body. For 2 full days, they watched TV, updated their MySpace pages, and pretended everything was fine. A chilling display of detachment. But the smell and the guilt started to creep in. They realized they were in deep trouble. So they called in a third dude, 16-year-old Nathan Gaudette, asking him for help to get rid of the evidence. Together, they drove Adrienne's body to a remote field. First, they tried to burn it with gasoline, but the flames failed to totally destroy the remains. Unable to fully cremate the evidence, the trio resorted to a truly messed up act. They dismembered Adrienne's body and dumped the parts into a manhole near Black Hawk. Weeks later, when Corey finally cracked under police pressure, his confession came out in broken fragments of fear and regret. Sarah, the ultimate mastermind, stayed quiet and cocky, changing her story with every interview, acting like she was untouchable and too smart to be busted. The subsequent trials turned into a complete spectacle, labeled by the media as the MySpace murder. Prosecutors painted Sarah Cobb as the real-deal villain, manipulative, hungry for control, and a cold-blooded predator. Corey Gregory, they argued, was just her puppet, a willing accessory who confused infatuation with loyalty. The evidence, especially Corey's confession and the horrific aftermath details, was damning. Sarah's claims of self-defense were straight up ignored by the jury. They didn't buy the story that this was anything but a premeditated, jealousy-fueled killing. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to a lengthy 48 years behind bars. Corey, despite his later regret, received 45 years. Nathan Gadet, the snitch who helped destroy evidence, served 5 years in juvenile detention. For the small town of East Moline, this case was a huge gut punch. It shattered the illusion of innocence and left a wound that never closed. Adrienne's MySpace page, which held her final bubbly post about hanging with Sarah later, remained online, a haunting, tragic memorial that changed how an entire generation viewed trust and friendship.
Her and fill it with water. When you're done, pour Drano in her. I am going to rip her nose ring out and burn it. Burn her flesh. Moffat, I want to get it done. I don't want to wait. I'm not killing her right away.
In 2010, in Langford, British Columbia, Kimberly Proctor was a bright, creative 18-year-old, the kind of teenager who was straight up funny and impossible to ignore. She was super into anime and loved writing stories online, where she could be her full, unfiltered self. That's where she met Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffat, two classmates who seemed awkward but harmless. They hung out in group chats, played games, and shared dark jokes, a typical teenage friendship in the digital age. But behind the screens, the two boys were becoming something truly messed up. Cruz, only 16, was intelligent but deeply disturbed. His father was a convicted murderer. He spent nights reading about violence, power, and killers who felt nothing. Cameron, 17, was quieter but equally detached, desperate to impress the only person who paid him attention. They formed a closed, cruel loop where empathy evaporated and their dark fantasy took over. They were plotting a murder for the experience of it. And they had chosen a victim, their friend, Kimberly. They planned every nasty detail, a blueprinted crime that started in a chat room. The digital footprint of this crime is what makes it so chilling. The boys' chat logs later revealed hundreds of messages describing the attack step by step. They joked about it like it was a challenge, a twisted story they were writing together. They discussed which friend to lure, how to make her disappear, and which excuses they'd use if they got busted. One file found on Cruz's computer was chillingly titled The Plan, ending with the line, "We have to make it perfect." There was no motive, no anger, no jealousy, no revenge. They wanted the experience of killing, something psychologists later called sadism born from pure boredom. On March 18, 2010, Cruz messaged Kimberly to come over. She agreed without hesitation. She'd been to his house before, and she trusted him. Before leaving, she texted a friend she'd be right back. That was the last message she ever sent. The innocence of that final text is a complete gut punch. She walked into a premeditated, coordinated trap orchestrated by the two dudes she considered her friends. What happened inside the house unfolded exactly as they had designed it. It was methodical and horrifying. They restrained Kimberly, sexually assaulted her, and used a bag to suffocate her. Then, in a truly cold-blooded move, they placed her body in a freezer. Hours later, they carried the remains in a bag along the Galloping Goose Trail, a popular local path, and set it ablaze beneath a pedestrian bridge. This was not a crime of passion. This was an execution followed by a calculated, freaky disposal. When Kimberly's parents realized she was missing and called her phone until the voicemail filled up, police quickly traced her last online messages and calls, leading straight to Cruz and Cameron. When officers arrived, both boys looked super calm, even curious. Inside Cruz's computer, detectives found everything: the chat logs, the violent fantasies, and the digital blueprints of the murder. Faced with a mountain of evidence, both boys confessed. Their statements were emotionless, just lists of actions without remorse, like listening to a tutorial for killing. The trial was brutal. Prosecutors read the boys' online conversations aloud, and the courtroom fell completely silent as jurors heard teenagers casually describing how to end a life, joking about excuses and how they'd laugh about it later. The judge called it evil for entertainment. Both were charged as adults with first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison, the maximum allowed under Canada's youth sentencing laws. The judge told them, "You are cold-blooded, calculated, and without empathy." For Kimberly's family, justice felt hollow. Her father refused to even use the killers' names, saying they didn't deserve to be remembered over his daughter. The case became a landmark in digital criminology, Canada's first fully documented online-to-offline murder. Every message, every plan, every fantasy had been typed, stored, and recovered, proving that in the digital age, nothing truly disappears. Psychologists concluded it was the absence of motive that was terrifying, a blueprint for how empathy can veil in isolation. Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffat remain in prison, serving their life sentences, the ultimate reminder that betrayal sometimes comes from pure digital emptiness.
Summer of 1993, in a South Florida resort community. A 20-year-old boy was found beaten and stabbed to death in one of the most brutal murders area police had ever seen.
In the sunny suburbs of Hollywood, Florida, in 1993, Bobby Kent was the self-proclaimed king of his small circle. He was charismatic, confident, and utterly cruel, a classic high school bully. His closest friend since childhood was Marty Puccio, and their relationship was built not on loyalty, but on fear. Bobby treated Marty like his personal property, humiliating him constantly, threatening him, and even assaulting him publicly. Everyone in their crew knew Marty was Bobby's whipping boy, but Marty was too scared or too loyal to bail. Things started getting messed up when Marty met Lisa Conley, a girl who saw right through Bobby's control and hated how he treated Marty. Lisa tried to pull her boyfriend away, telling him he needed to ditch Bobby, but Bobby's hold was powerful. He kept showing up, controlling, and threatening. Soon, the resentment wasn't just Marty's. It was shared by everyone around them. The hatred grew, slowly turning a group of ordinary teenagers into a circle of conspirators, planning, and execution. As Bobby's abuse escalated, with threats of violence and blackmail, the conversations among his friends turned dark. It started as a fantasy, just talk about teaching Bobby a lesson. But with every shared story of abuse, the line between revenge and cold-blooded murder began to blur. Lisa Connolly, fueled by her hatred for the bully, became a main mastermind of the plan. Her cousin, Derek Zirko, joined in, along with Allie Willis, Heather Swallers, Donald Seck, and Derek Kaufman, the dude who claimed to have mob connections. It became a huge, self-feeding circle of anger. 7 teenagers convinced themselves that killing Bobby was the only way out of his control. They weren't hardened criminals, just ordinary kids who had been pushed to the absolute edge. By July 1993, the plan was set. They decided to lure Bobby to a remote canal near Weston under the pretense of a late-night hangout. Bobby, oblivious and always expecting his friends to follow him, fell right into their trap. He was laughing and joking with his so-called friends, unaware he was heading to his dead end. On the night of July 14th, everything seemed chill at the canal. They drank, talked, and waited for the right moment. Then, in an instant, the ambush began. Donald Seck attacked first, stabbing Bobby. Marty Puccio, the lifelong victim and best friend, joined in, stabbing him again and again in a surge of terrified rage. While the others watched or participated, someone hit Bobby with a baseball bat. When it was over, Bobby Kent, the self-proclaimed king, lay dying, his body sinking into the mud. The group fled the scene immediately, leaving him there in the dark Florida night. Investigators later described the scene as one of the most brutal they had ever seen, saying his body looked like it had been shredded by an animal. But the guilt and fear set in fast. Within days, the truth started to unravel when one of the teens cracked and confessed to her mother, who immediately called the police. Investigators quickly pieced together the shocking story of a premeditated execution fueled by years of deep-seated resentment and abuse. This suburban murder became national news, a complete gut punch to the idea of safe, middle-class adolescence.
The trials were a complex mess, with each of the 7 teenagers playing a different role. Marty Puccio, the victim-turned-killer, faced the highest charge. Lisa Conley, the girlfriend who planned the ambush, was charged as an accessory. The defense argued that Bobby's intense abuse had pushed them all off the rails and that the murder was an explosion of survival, not malice. But the jury saw it as a calculated, cold-blooded murder. Marty Puccio initially received the death penalty, later reduced to life in prison. Lisa Connolly was sentenced to 22 years, and Derek Kaufman received life. The others got shorter sentences for their lesser roles, but none escaped the weight of what they'd done. For Bobby's father, the pain never faded. He once said, "People talk about what kind of person he was, but no one deserves what they did to him." The case is still debated today. Was it revenge, or was it survival? Marty Puccio remains in prison, serving life. The Bobby Kent slaying remains a haunting reminder of how unchecked control and abuse can twist a group of dudes into a conspiracy of killers. In 1995, Arroyo Grande, California looked like every chill coastal town: surf, sun, and that laid-back vibe. But behind the calm, something messed up was brewing. 16-year-old Elyse Marie Pahler was the bright, artistic girl, loved drama club, straight up nice. She was the kind of girl who trusted easily, maybe too easy. Then you have the other crew: Jacob DeLoach, Joseph Farella, and Royce Casey. These dudes were the town misfits. Long hair, black clothes, obsessed with heavy metal bands like Slayer, and forming their own group called Hatred. This wasn't just typical teenage rebellion. For Farella, the ringleader, fantasy was starting to replace reality. He got super into the idea that true power and fame came from evil. He started pushing this crazy concept to the others. A virgin sacrifice could make their band go viral before there was even a YouTube. The other two, Casey and DeLoach, were just hungry for identity, afraid to look like wimps. They were about to turn a small-town hangout into a cold-blooded murder scene, all because of a stupid fantasy. Elyse knew the boys in passing. They weren't strangers. So when they invited her to hang out in the isolated eucalyptus grove outside town on a warm July night in 1995, she didn't think twice. She said yes, thinking it was just a chill summer hangout. They met after dark. They passed a joint, joking about music. Everything seemed real cool. Then the joking stopped. Farella gave the signal. The other two hesitated for a second, then followed his lead. The attack was swift, brutal, and completely off the rails. Elyse screamed, but the sound of the ocean and the wind just swallowed her voice. When it was over, she lay still. The boys stood over her, breathing hard, looking at the horrifying mess they had made. There was no ritual, no demonic power, just a girl they had killed for an imaginary goal. They didn't call the cops. They just left her body there and walked home in the dark like nothing happened. For the next 8 months, the whole town was freaking out over Elise's disappearance, while these 3 psychos kept the secret locked down, even returning to the grove multiple times. Elise's disappearance was a gut punch to the community. Her parents were constantly on the local news, setting a place for her at dinner every night, hoping she'd just walk through the door, but the phone never rang. The case went stone cold until March 1996, when one of the killers cracked. Royce Casey, the oldest, had started going to church. The sermons and the guilt were messing him up, and he couldn't sleep. One afternoon, he walked right into the police station and confessed everything. He laid out how Pharrella had convinced them that killing Elyse would give their band demonic power. He described the whole setup and even led detectives right to the grove. Beneath the dry brush and leaves, they found Elyse's remains, exactly where he said they'd be. The town was shattered. National media descended, calling it a satanic murder. The headlines practically wrote themselves, pouring fuel back onto the satanic panic of the 80s. But inside the courtroom, the truth was less mystical. No demons, no rituals, just messed up ego, fantasy, and the complete moral blindness of 3 teenagers who were too far gone. All 3 boys, Pharrella, Deloach, and Casey, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. They were sentenced to 25 years to life. As Pharrella mumbled a weak apology, Elyse's father quietly noted, they took every tomorrow she was supposed to have. But the case didn't end there. In a truly wild move, Elyse's family filed a civil lawsuit against the band Slayer, arguing their violent lyrics had influenced the killers. It was a global story, sparking a huge debate about art, responsibility, and free speech. A case that was ultimately busted by the courts, ruling that music can't be blamed for murder. The responsibility rested solely with the 3 dudes who chose to act. Decades later, the story is still making headlines. In 2025, Royce Casey and Jacob Deloach were granted parole, telling the board they had found faith and were no longer the boys they once were. Elyse's mother spoke out again, saying freedom was not the same as justice. The tragic truth about Elyse Pahler is that evil doesn't always show up with rituals and symbols. Sometimes it just looks like 3 bored teenagers chasing a stupid fantasy.
I wish that I had the courage and the strength to say, hey, this is enough, and to see what they were doing and stop it.
In 1985, in Arleta, California, Michelle Missy Avila was a bright, charming 17-year-old. She was super into fashion and dancing, and she had that magnetic quality that drew everyone in. Her closest friends were Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. They were the quintessential inseparable trio. Sleepovers, gossip, photos, the whole 9 yards. But once high school hit, the foundation of that friendship started to crack. Missy was growing up, dating and making new friends, and she was spending less time with the other 2. Karen and Laura started feeling left out, and that feeling twisted into pure envy. They weren't just jealous of her looks. They hated her effortless confidence, the light they could never imitate. Rumors started spreading, lies about Missy flirting with other girls' boyfriends, about her changing. No one was sure who started the gossip, but it stuck. Behind the smiles in those photos, Karen and Laura's envy had turned into a toxic, cold-blooded rage. The biggest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who know all your secrets. October 1st, 1985, Laura Doyle called Missy and invited her out. She told Missy that Karen wanted to clear the air about the rising tension, a straight-up lie used as bait. Missy, ever the loyal friend, agreed, telling her mother she'd be home by dinner. She never returned. The 3 girls drove out to the mountains near Big Tuhonga Canyon, a remote, wooded area. At first, it was just awkward small talk, but then the argument blew up. Karen accused Missy of stealing her boyfriend, and Laura quickly joined in. Missy, confused and hurt, denied everything, but the confrontation turned vicious fast. The girls grabbed her, dragged her toward the creek bed, and attacked. They drowned her in the shallow water, assaulted her, and then, in a terrifyingly detached move, left a heavy log over her body before driving away like it was no big deal. When hikers found Missy's body 3 days later, investigators were stunned. No sign of robbery or a stranger. The only clue was the utter brutality of the scene, a teenage girl left dead in the wilderness by the people she trusted most.
In one of the most messed up acts of betrayal, nobody suspected Karen or Laura. They attended Missy's funeral, cried, hugged Missy's heartbroken mother, and even joined the initial search efforts. Karen took the deception to a whole new, cold-blooded level. She moved in with Missy's family for a while, claiming she wanted to help them through the grief. She slept in Missy's bed, wore her clothes, and comforted the very mother whose daughter she had murdered. It was a level of audacity that's hard to comprehend. Years passed, and the case went stone cold, though rumors always swirled. Then, nearly 6 years later, in 1991, the truth finally surfaced. A mutual friend had a fight with Karen and, in a fit of rage, went to the police, revealing that both girls had privately confessed and even bragged about what they'd done. Investigators reopened the case, and the details spilled out fast. The two former best friends were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Karen's long-term deceit was a betrayal that ran even deeper than the murder itself.
The trials captivated California, with prosecutors painting the girls as jealous friends driven by cruelty and envy. The defense argued they were immature and reckless and never meant to kill her, but the jury didn't buy it. Both were found guilty in 1992 and sentenced to 15 years to life. For Missy's mother, Adrienne Avila, the realization that Karen had lived in her home and pretended to share her grief was a profound gut punch. That betrayal became a lifetime scar. Both women were eventually paroled after serving over 2 decades. But even freedom didn't bring peace. Karen began promoting a book about the case, calling it Her Side of the Story, a move that was straight up disgusting to Missy's family. Adrienne Avila fought back, leading a campaign to stop convicted killers from profiting off their crimes. That fight led to the passing of Missy's Law in 2013, which blocks criminals from earning money through books or interviews about their offenses. The story of Missy Avila remains one of America's most famous friendship murders, not for its brutality, but for the devastating, cold-blooded nature of the ultimate betrayal.
So you saw Mike Bargo shoot Seth?
Yes, ma'am. And he grabbed the body, put it into the bathtub, and then he was talking about how...
In 2011, in Summerfield, Florida, high school drama wasn't confined to the hallways. It played out on Facebook. Zeph Jackson was 17, charming, athletic, and loud. He loved loud music, dirt bikes, and making people laugh. He was dating Amber Wright, a sharp-tongued 15-year-old with a rebellious streak. Their relationship was a hot mess. Love, fighting, breaking up, making up, all broadcasted publicly online. By the spring of 2011, things turned toxic. Zeph accused Amber of cheating. She accused him of abuse. Their arguments were constantly shared and commented on by their classmates. What looked like typical teenage heartbreak was about to spiral into something truly cold-blooded. Amber started seeing a new dude, Michael Bargo, who was older, intense, and possessive. Bargo hated Zeph. He saw him as competition and became obsessed with the idea that Zeph needed to die. Most people brushed it off as trash talk, just teenage posturing. But Bargo wasn't joking. He started planning, and his plan hinged on one deadly thing: luring Zeph into a trap using the person he still cared about most.
Bargo's entire plan revolved around Amber being the perfect bait. On April 17, 2011, Amber messaged Seath on Facebook. Her words were calm, even sweet. She told him she missed him and wanted to make peace, a straight-up lie. Seath believed her. He told a friend he was going to see Amber that night, the last message he ever sent. Amber and her friend Charlie Ely were waiting at Ely's house, a small property on the edge of town. Inside, the crew was ready. Bargo, Kyle Hooper, and Justin Soto. The house smelled like cigarettes and gasoline. They had already loaded a gun and rehearsed the ambush. Text messages between the group revealed every single step of the plan. One message from Amber read, "We're going to fix this tonight." Another from Bargo simply said, "Bring him here." When Seath walked in, he was immediately attacked. Bargo shot him multiple times while the others joined in, trapping him. Seath tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Within minutes, the betrayal was complete. What followed was profoundly disturbing. The group stuffed Seath's body into a sleeping bag, carried it outside, and committed a horrifying final act. They burned his body in a backyard fire pit. When the flames died down, they gathered what was left, put it into paint buckets, and dumped it into a nearby limestone quarry. Then, in a truly cold-blooded move, they all went out for food, as if nothing had happened. When Seath's parents reported him missing, police started checking his friends' stories. Within 24 hours, the mess unraveled. Text messages between Amber and Bargo exposed the entire plot. Detectives descended on the Ely house and found the gruesome evidence: bullet holes, blood, and ash in the fire pit. The entire group was busted within days. One by one, they confessed, some with guilt, most without emotion. Bargo, the mastermind, showed no remorse, claiming Seath deserved it. Prosecutors described it as a teenage conspiracy fueled by jealousy and control, all detailed through their own digital communication. The trial gripped Florida. Bargo was portrayed as the manipulative ringleader, with Amber as the bait and the others as willing accomplices. When the details of the digital planning and the gruesome disposal were laid out, the jury didn't hesitate. Michael Bargo was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, becoming the youngest person on Florida's death row at the time. The others received life sentences. Amber Wright, just 15 when it happened, was initially sentenced to life without parole, later reduced to 25 years to life after appeals citing her age. For Seath's family, the sentences felt hollow. His father, Scott Jackson, famously said he couldn't forgive the people who had smiled at his son one week and killed him the next. The case became a symbol of how teenage emotion, combined with social media and mob mentality, can spiral into sheer horror. Even today, Bargo remains on death row, and the others live with the weight of their choices, a haunting reminder that they used friendship as a weapon.